Welcome to creating Santas, Gnomes and Wizards with needle felting. This is a little fellow that could be created from the kits that I have. I've just added a bit of glitter and a little wee book, and there are lots of fun ways to decorate them when you're done. I'm going to be creating the Santa today with the red wool. So I'm going to start by dividing my nice fluffy core wool into 3 or 4 long strips that I'm going to wind around a skewer. I'm just applying some pressure as I wind so I have less stabbing to do later. And I'm using a little skewer that's about 5.5 inches long just to remind me not to get too tall. I'm going to use my bigger needle to tangle up the scales of the wool. The needle has barbs on the end, and they function to tangle up the little wool scales to make them stay in place. So I'm just rolling this skewer a little bit. I have a felting surface. You can use a big kitchen sponge or a piece of upholstery foam. That would work just fine as well. I have to be sure to do my stabbing up along the top of the wool, avoiding that wooden skewer. If I hit the skewer, I'm likely to bend the needle. And if that happens, I'm not going to try to bend it back. I'm just going to try to keep on going because bending it back almost always results in a broken needle. I can add the second piece. So I'm trying to remember that this is the thick end. This is the thin end. So now I'm winding a little bit extra around the bottom, but I'm still going to work my way up and down a little bit, trying to create a smooth surface. I'm adding my final piece now. And I want to make sure I get it a little bit thicker at the bottom because I want to be able to stand this up when I'm finished. Now I'm poking at it from the bottom to try to do a couple of things. I want to create a flat base, but I'm also pushing that bottom bit up a little bit so that my little Santa is not going to be too skinny. I'm going to take a pinch of the extra bit of roving. I'm going to use one ball to make the nose and another little ball to make the pom-pom. So I'm just rolling it up a bit and stabbing along the edge, trying to stay away from my fingers. Then I can roll the sides up and just keep rolling along to create a little ball. Now, if I were to poke along all over, I would end up flattening it. If I want it to stay round, I try to keep that in mind as I'm stabbing away and just be poking along the edges of the ball and not throughout the center. So I'm going to, I think this will be the smaller ball, so I'm going to make this into the nose, and the other one I will do the same thing, but I'm going to set it aside and save it for a pom-pom later. Once I have the size and shape that I want, I'm going to cover it with some of the pink fiber. So I've got some pink here, probably more than I need, because I just need to cover the top with a couple of layers so I can set it down, once again poking around the outside because I don't want to flatten it. And you might wonder, when do you use the smaller needle? The smaller needle is for when you don't want holes to show. So it's not quite as strong, not quite as good for attaching, but it's good for final touches, like putting your outside colors on when you don't want a lot of holes. So once again, I'm poking around the outside, and I can fold the extra underneath, or I can pull it up over the top if I feel that the pink is still too thin. But you don't really need to worry either way because the edges will be hidden by the beard in a little while anyway. I've done a bit more stabbing along the nose just to get some of the stray fibers to lay flat. Then I'm going to take the skewer out and decide where I want the nose to be. Now right now this guy looks pretty skinny, but he'll fatten up a bit when we get the color on. If you want to play around with the beard, then you probably want the nose to be at halfway or even a tiny bit higher. But if you want it just to be really humorous, then it's kind of fun to have the nose down lower and have him be mostly hat. I'm going to put mine about in the center, holding it in place, and once again, stabbing around the outside to tangle up those fibers. Now I should mention that this larger needle that I'm using is a 36 star, and the smaller is a 38 twisted. I've been using Wizpick and Gros-Beckert needles for quite a few years now, and aside from occasionally stabbing a wire that's inside a sculpture, they really don't seem to wear out. They don't seem to get dull. You can get some needles at your local craft chain store, and they're worth giving a try, but they may not be quite as good a quality. And when I mention about the color, the blue and the red needle, it's important to note that every company will have their own color coding system. So don't assume that another company has the same colors. The next thing I want to do is get the arms ready. So I'm going to take this really thin wisp of core wool and split it even smaller. These pipe cleaners are actually from a tobacco store, so they're much more bristly and much stiffer than chenille stems that you get at a craft store. And I find them really helpful because I can wind the wool and the wire inside the pipe cleaner really grabs it. It's quite bristly. So I just want to put a thin coat of white, a thin layer of white on the pipe cleaner between the hook and the little oval at the end. This is going to be the hand. And this is what the red will catch onto when I add the color. And then with the bigger needle, go just a few times along the edge. That wool is already quite well attached, but this will ensure that it's not going anywhere. And you can also give it a little bit of a spin to tangle up those barbs even further. So I'm going to finish the second one. Now I have my colored wool, and I'm going to set aside a little bit for later on when I attach the arms to the body. And I'm going to wrap these arms with some of the colored wool. So whenever I want to do two things and I want them to be equal, I start with one piece of wool and split it in two. So I'm going to wrap the color between the hook and the loop to create the arm. I'm keeping in mind that the hook side is the shoulder and the loop is the hand. So if it gets a little thinner down at the loop, that's just fine. That would just be the wrist. Wind my way back up. And a few gentle stabs along the edge. And that wool won't be going anywhere. And I'll do the other one. There are my little arms. Now I'm going to create the mitts. Now I'm going to divide that into two, but I'm actually going to divide it again because I want a very thin layer of black. I'm going to set it on the little hand, hold it with my thumb, and wrap around a few times and let that bristly pipe cleaner grab onto the fibers. Now I'm very carefully poking a little bit on the inside of that loop. I want to be careful not to stab the pipe cleaner. That's going to help to hold it in place because the tricky part is getting up along the top. Oh, I got it. I think I got it covered. This is the most fidgety part of the project. So just take your time and try not to bend your needle or stab your finger. There. Anytime you get little fuzzies left over and your needle just isn't grabbing them, just feel free to grab some scissors and take off the little stray hairs. There's no harm in that. I have my 2 arms and 2 little mittens done. I could make the mittens fatter if I want, but I'm going to just leave them for now. I'm going to set them aside. Now I'm going to cover the whole body. And if you have a big sheet like I do, you can basically just wrap it. But if you have smaller bits, that's okay too. You can just add them a little bit at a time. This would be the time to use your smaller needle so that you don't have big holes showing in your colored wool. So if you don't want to add it small piece at a time, you can set the wool down and do a bit of felting. Doesn't really matter which needle for this point. So you can just stab it all over and that will help to hold it together. Just make sure you lift it off your felting surface every now and again so that it doesn't get stuck onto your surface. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a little hole for his nose to come through. There it is. Okay, so I'm going to use, I'm using the blue needle right now. I want to hold this in place around his nose. Just be careful that you don't bend the needle if you're dragging it around like I'm doing. That's a place that's a time you're quite likely to bend it if you're not careful. So I'm going to keep poking along, wrapping that wool. But when it overlaps, I can just tear the extra away. And I may end up using this. So I'm going to just set it out of the way for now. So I'm just going to stab away. And then I can take those extra bits to cover any thin areas. Keep in mind though, he's going to have a beard here. So I don't have to worry about it too much underneath his nose. I've got it staying in place and I see that I have a lot more at the bottom than I need. I'm just going to tear that off and I'm going to fold this under and that's going to help establish a base so he doesn't fall over. So there's a little bit of extra at the bottom. Just attach it and keep in mind that if it ends up being a little bit of a lip around the bottom edge, that will be helpful later on. So I'm not going to worry about this little spot that's a bit bare. It's going to be covered up with the next step, which is the most fun step of all. And up here at the top, I've got this big tuft. Well, actually, it could be fun, but I think I'm just going to give it a twist and cut off the extra and felt that until it becomes a bit of a point. I gave it a twist to hold it. And remember that felting it is going to make it constrict and hold together. I added a little bit of the extra red up above the hat to fill in some bare patches. I still have this tufty bit at the top, but I'm not concerned, and I'll show you why. I had a lot of red left over, so I've taken some and made a little sheet of felt. I'm creating a little strip that's thicker at the bottom to add to the bottom of the Santa so he won't fall over. So I'm going to fold this bottom piece so it'll be a little thicker still. Give it a bit of felting to hold it in place, and then I'll add it to the bottom of the Santa. Just like that. We'll just make him a little bit more sturdy. Just a bit of felting along the top to hold it in place. But I don't want to do much around the bottom because I want it to stay lofty and full to give him a stronger base. With some wool top, that's the kind that looks more like hairs, I'm going to create the beard. So I'm going to lay it on the felting surface And I just like to give it a few stabs along the halfway, just because I'm going to fold it there. This helps to hold it in place. Fold it over, a few pokes along the top, just to help to keep it from flying away when I pick it up off the felting surface. So I want it right up against his nose. And I'm going to firmly felt it down with my big needle. And then I'll have a look and see what shape I've got. All right. And then I could gently felt along the outsides just to hold it in place. But what I like to do is get it in place and then draw his mustache. So that's where his mouth would be. So there's the line from his mouth up to the nose. And then I can decide how long I want the mustache sides to be and just draw that in. Still needs a bit of firming up here, so I'm going to work on that for a bit. Now he stands up when I check him on the table. Now I'm going to attach the arms. So I'm going to put a little snip on each side of the beard. And insert that little hook. Well, it's not very big, so it's not going to go very far. A little bend at the elbow. A few pokes around that arm with the red needle of my big needle. And that will help to hold it in place. Now you can put a dab of glue in there, a household goop or E6000 or something like that. And that would make it even stronger. But needling it in place seems to do the trick. So I'll do the same on the other side, but then I'm going to add that little pinch that I saved, add a little bit of shoulder to it, and that will just secure it even a little better. So that's going to tuck up there. On the arm itself, just a few pokes to hold it in place, but you really want to think about where you're attaching it around the outside. All right, I've taken some of the extra red and filled his hat out a bit more, added a bit more onto his back. It was just a little bit too soft and too slender. And now I'm ready for the finishing touches. Now I have decided his beard is a little bit long, so I'm going to trim it, but I'm not going to cut it across this way. I'm going to use the scissors up and down, probably how your hairdresser would do it, so you didn't end up with a bowl cut. Pull off the extra. That's a bit better, yeah. All right, I have just a couple of pieces of wool left, a couple of things to show you. When I made the ball for the nose, I also used a piece to make a pom-pom. And then I have one last little piece of the roving, the carded wool. I'm going to give it a little bit of stabbing to help hold it together, and I'm going to create a hat band with this. Then we'll add the pom-pom, and he'll be done. Now there are hundreds of needle felting videos on YouTube, and a lot of them are certainly a lot fancier, a lot more high-tech than mine. But if you have one of my kits, I hope that this has helped you go through the step-by-step in the instructions to figure out what it all means. Okay, now it's a bit more round, so I can wrap it around his nose, and I want to attach it right at the bottom. I'll do some felting to hold it really close around his nose. Now if it's sneaking down, we'll just push it back and give it a few stabs to hold it in place. Work your way around the back. I like the hat band to come down really low, but that's just the way that I like it. Pull off the extra so it doesn't get too thick at the back. And bring that side down. Pull off the extra there as well. There, and we just overlap those two pieces at the back. And do the felting around the outside edge so that it stays nice and round. It doesn't flatten out too much. But you see it's a bit fluffier here. That's okay. Just flatten it down a little with your needle. All right, why do I have all these tufts up there? Because I'm going to cut it off anyway. It didn't matter. I like to have a little flat surface to attach the pom-pom. So I'm going to poke in from the pom-pom to the hat, and also from the hat to the pom-pom. Just makes it a bit more secure to come at it in a couple of different directions. All right, now I could do it a little bit more, but it's just about got it. Do keep these away from your pets and small children. They're not meant to be toys, they're meant to be ornamental. But they should hold together just fine. So if you have any little fuzzies, trim them down. You can always add a ribbon to the top if you want to hang it from a tree. But right now it has a nice flat base to stand up. And I think he's done. There we go. When you've got your little guy all done, it's time to raid your craft cupboard. Whether it's dollar store ribbon, or some kind of glitter. Makes nice snow along his hat band. I'm really fond of these little Christmas lights, and they can be kind of hard to find. Any little ornament, something for him to hold in his hands if you like, or a little pile of gifts. Hot glue or E6000 or household goop, any of those things will work. So I hope you have fun making your little friends and finding around the house what you can use to decorate them. Thanks a lot. Have fun.